I've been meaning to make a video for decades about Quiex vinyl, or really about why so many pressings seem to mimic Quiex vinyl, and I just never got around to it. But then in late 2024, Kim Deal came out with an album that appears black, but actually has glitter in it. And you might expect an album with glitter to be noisy, which any reasonable person might expect. But the glitter isn't on the vinyl, it's in the vinyl, it's not on the surface. When I held the record up to the light, it actually looks translucent in the same way Quiex vinyl does, which makes sense since it was probably made without a lot of carbon black additives. Most records with glitter in them, like this evil 12-inch from Grinderman, were also translucent in order to get the glitter to work properly in the record, since the glitter can sit below the surface and still be visible. I think the reason I took notice of the Kim Deal record was because the formulation reminded me of Quiex pressings. Quiex vinyl is specifically formatted to be quiet, and a lot of the pressings are actually promotional records, limited edition, first or early pressings, not intended for sale, but rather for radio play or for play in record stores, advertising, essentially. Traditionally, most people think of vinyl records as black and assume black is the purest state of vinyl, but vinyl isn't naturally or originally black. Carbon black is added to the process, which gives records their common black color. Natural, uncolored virgin vinyl is actually a translucent off-white neutral color, the same as this Lucinda Williams record. It appears white, although not opaque bright white like this Feely's record, which is pressed with a different formula in order to make it look bright white, nor is vinyl crystal clear like this record from the band Low. Clear records must also be made with a different formula. Quiex, however, at least for the money, is often some of the best sounding vinyl available. The telltale translucent amber effect, where the record looks black until it is actually held up to the light, doesn't guarantee it is actually Quiex. Some have said that because the vinyl is thin, like lots of pressings in the 70s and 80s were, that's why they're translucent. But it's not because they were thin like flexi discs, although this effect is more prominent in thinner records. They're translucent not because of their weight, but more in the way that virgin vinyl like Lucinda Williams' Good Souls, Better Angels record is. Sometimes people assume black is natural, that color vinyl is a new modern-day gimmick. But if you look back at old records like these old Morrison Record Company discs from the 1940s, they've actually got a lot of color added to the vinyl, and the same is true for this 1956 release from The Five Keys, which reveals that translucent white virgin vinyl, but with dyes added to make it look colored in different areas. Colored vinyl has been around since the earliest days, basically. Quiex records make me think of all these black records, which were also translucent, which I remember seeing back in the late 80s from local bands like Cellophane Ceiling and Acorns. Again, these were not actually Quiex, but must have used a similar formula. A large percentage of these are promotional use only records, which aren't meant to be for sale, and I think they were used by DJs and record stores, so if a radio played songs from these discs, they sounded good. A great way to promote a new release. After all, no one wants to buy something that doesn't sound good. All of these Neil Young records, which were not marked as Quiex records either, yet they had the same effect. And if you look around at most of your records, which are promotional copies, not for sale or resale, you will probably notice a lot of those 12-inch singles and promotional copies, particularly from the 80s, are actually semi-translucent. I'm a huge Feely's fan, so when I was in college I tried to pick up every 12-inch single I could get my hands on, and a lot of my Feely stuff has the same translucency. The same is true for their side projects from Young Woo and the Tripes, both from the Coyote label, all translucent, even though they were slightly different colors. Almost all of my Trip Shakespeare promotional 12-inch singles, like these promotional singles of Gone, 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 The Crane, and Pearl, all use a similar formula. And I want to make clear these are not gimmicks. Even though they aren't solid, opaque black vinyl, they were never intentionally colored vinyl. Most of these aren't technically Quiex either, although most of them have an amber color to them, and they often appear colored. Again, that's not the goal of the pressings. Quality is the goal. Speaking of quality, I should mention Japanese pressings. A lot of Japanese pressings are highly sought after by collectors, like this XTC copy of Mummer. I don't have a ton of Japanese pressings, and only a handful of mine act like Quiex pressings. The following images of records from David Bowie, Lou Reed, Talking Heads were sent to me by Roger Simonsen. Clearly, other Japanese pressings also have the same translucent quality to the vinyl. Japanese pressings are often considered some of the best pressings out there, and it's common to see the same Quiex-like vinyl, particularly from that time period. But lots of these releases from labels such as SST, New Alliance, Relativity, Twin Tone, A&M, Big Time, Restless Records, and so on were common, especially in the 1980s. They're all a little different. Some are slightly more yellow, some are a little more brown, or sometimes gray, purple, red, green, varying from more opaque to more translucent. But the common thread is that they definitely appear to be solid black when you look at them fresh from the sleeve. By the time the 90s came around, it became much more rare, although I would still find occasional ones like this Pavement record from 1997. But back in 1984, when Purple Rain was released, it was much more common. Other really popular releases, at least if pressed during that same time period, such as the Beatles' Greatest Hits compilations, or some John Lennon records, as well as some David Bowie and Elton John records, often had the same formulation and effect. This Changes One Bowie record is actually incredibly marbled, and the marbling might make you expect it to be noisy, but consistently these records are some of the best sounding ones that I have in my collection, so there seems to be something about these, whether it's less carbon black used, or if they're using dyes instead of carbon on some of these particular releases, isn't something I can speak with any real authority. There are certainly lots of opinions posted online, but rarely by authoritative sources. I do know I have a lot of these in my collection. Granted, I have a pretty large collection, but if you go through your own records, particularly if you have a lot from the 80s or that general time period, you might be surprised how often you see this formulation, which many pressing plants were using during those years. The majority of my Miracle Legion albums from this time period are the same way. It's another band that I purchased every release from, so I watched for any EPs or singles from them. But usually it's unexpected to stumble onto these records, to be honest. Some favorites are a few of my Robin Hitchcock records, because the colors would often vary from the usual amber, although some of them might be a really deep amber. Others might look gray when lit from behind. I think all of my Let's Active records are like this. They might be a silvery gray or have a hint of purple in them. Tommie Emmi had a DJM label of an Elton John record, which some people have pointed out can look like different colors depending on the light, which is something I want to get to in just a minute here. One of his records by The Police reminded me I also wanted to show Synchronicity. It's a well-known release that exists in multiple colors, sometimes fairly amber, other times more gray or purple or even blue. A lot of REM records are very amber colored, at least the original IRS pressings, although some copies of Murmur are fairly gray, and there are multiple colors of Reckoning. Amber is the common one, and I have probably 3 different amber versions, but I also have a couple purple copies. Supposedly there are green ones out there, although I don't have a green version. Every once in a while you'll see someone post a green translucent vinyl copy online, but I think something else is happening there. I should make clear, I don't mean releases like this copy of Chronic Town, which actually is intentionally a translucent blue colored vinyl. Generally, those that have the Quiex effect weren't meant to be colored vinyl. They were simply meant to be black, but just happened to look like a particular color when held up to the light. Dereck Higgins has a couple that I wanted to show, and he stumbled onto this release by Blondell, which was just what I was looking for. It's a perfect example of how so many of these records look like one color under artificial light, and in this case, an almost green. But when held up in front of the sun, it changes to a beautiful ruby red. This Dereck column record, for example, looks more amber or even a bit green when an LED flashlight is used, but it's another record that becomes a similar very deep ruby red when sunlight is used. One of the coolest ones is my copy of Joy Division's Closer, which is one of the more unusual ones because it actually simultaneously is fairly red at the center, which then transitions to amber, and then transitions again to a slightly more green towards the edges. Sometimes it shows better in a still photo, so I'll conclude with a still image so you can clearly see the transition from red to green. This and the following images in the video are all the same record. There's no tricks or filters. Since I happen to have random bulbs in my basement ceiling, I can show how all of these different bulbs all appear the same white. The ones on the left, although stamped LED, likely mimic fluorescent light, and the lights on the right of the room, which were actually made in Vietnam, are those really old incandescent bulbs before fluorescent or LED bulbs became popular. Viewing the records with the bulbs on the left results in the vinyl appearing green, and viewing the vinyl in front of the bulbs on the right result in a more red appearance. And in case you think this is Photoshop to fool people, I will try and track this in front of 3 different bulbs. The first reveals the combination of red and green, while the second light makes the vinyl appear green. And the incandescent bulb makes the vinyl appear red, much like the Dereck column did when viewing the sun through the record. And you know, I actually finished the video and decided I wanted to put this final theory to a test, so I grabbed the Atomic Cafe record, took it downstairs into the basement, and got the same results. The album was green under one light and a ruby red color under the other light, so clearly the light source makes a difference. I tried it with the Explorer's Hold by the Tripes. I did it to Reckoning, and got the same results. Very different colors under different lights. So just a quick bit of speculation. I don't think the R.E.M. album that's listed online is actually green. I think it's all of these albums look slightly different under different lights, and that's probably all it is. I'll end the video with lots of stills that were sent to me from friends, although I often don't know where the original photo came from, so those without attribution are simply shared so you can see a range of different releases from different bands. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all the records that are available, but it should at least give you a good idea of the kinds of releases that have been posted online, and hopefully it helps you find some of these in your own collection, or if you decide you want to find some to purchase for your own collection, maybe some of these images will help you in your own search. But if you Google Quiex vinyl records, you're going to see lists of tons of releases and different labels and specific things. And if you spot something in your Google search, maybe try Discogs and send off a note and say, hey, is that record translucent like Quiex? And before you buy it, and then you'll know you've got one in your collection. But like I said, you probably already do, and you just didn't know it. Thanks again, by the way, to Dereck for the music that's behind this video.